Pattabhi is easily the most serene person I have met in my life. And I have wondered what is the root of this serenity in Pattabhi.
I see myself, say, 2 years or 3 years. I lived in a big house in Nellore, which just, I think, my father built it just a year before I was born. I don't say my childhood was very happy because my father was a dominating figure, you see. So all of I and my sisters and all of us, we were all huddled in the back portion of the house. There was a front portion which was kept up like with the sofa sets and a dining table and Western style with attached bathrooms and in the back there was like where most of the women stayed. I remember at the time, of course, there was I only remember my mother and my grandmother. My grandmother being my father's mother. They all stayed together, the back portion of the house.
And Gandhiji came and stayed for one day, I think, in our house.
The thing I remember is he was climbing his steps. I was going after him and he gave me a banana. My father teaching me when I was 3 years old, he was teaching me alphabets or English or something of that kind, you know. And he's beating me and all that because it's too early to learn. And then it continued, I think, till I was 5 or 6, this teaching, this beating and teaching. I remember one incident. And my father came into the room. I had a chalk piece with me and a slate. My father began dictating something and asked me to write down. I didn't tell him that I didn't have a pencil. So I knew that I pretended as if I was writing it on the slate with the chalk. I know he will get angry. Probably I was wanting him to hit me, I think, so that I would rather hate him than. So I wrote the chalk piece because you can't write very well with chalk on a slate, you know. At the end of it, naturally, became a terrible beating. All my mother and grandmother and all came because I must have been howling, I don't know. And they all, I think they all said my father shouldn't teach me anymore. So from then on, he never taught me. My father was very much interested in literature. Even though he himself didn't study very much in school, he was very much interested in Telugu literature. And in Telugu, you know, we have this Bharatam and the classical books. Somebody used to come and read them out loud, shloka, the music type of musical singing. Telugu poetry can be sung, you know. Unlike other poetry which is only read, Telugu poetry you can give a ragam and sing also. There is one, some people think it is a defect, some people think it is an asset. My father had been to earliest jail when he was Satyagraha, Gandhi's Satyagraha. in 1921 or something like that. And he was kept in solitary confinement also for some. His health was spoilt at that time. From then on, he gave up eating night time, so he never ate till he died. Only the breakfast and lunch. He won't even touch even. He was such a strict type of self-control he had, you know.
That was when I was about 12 years old, and he wrote a letter to a friend who was a close friend of his, and asked whether he could see my father's children, not my father. So when that message came home, my mother wrote him a letter, my grandfather, a letter, saying that if you want to see your grandchildren, I think the least you can do is to see your son also. If you don't want to see me, I can understand, but you should at least see your son. So when that message went back, that letter went back, he agreed. He said, okay, let Pattabhi bring the kids. So we went to Nellore. We drove from Madras to Nellore, went to this friend's house. There we, freshened up and whatever. And then this friend, my grandfather's friend, he took us to the house. And it's a huge house, it's one of these huge mansions built in the kind of colonial style, with the zanana at the back and a big portico and a huge driveway going up to the house. And the whole portico was absolutely, the veranda in the front was absolutely bare, except for this very one tall straight chair on which my grandfather was sitting. So we drove up and we parked a little away from the portico and got out and walked up to my grandfather, and my brother and I were absolutely terrified, My mother had given us all these lectures about, how you can actually soften him up, and all he needs is love, and, you should talk to him, and he's lonely, and, you should reach out and all that. But both of us were so tiny, we were terrified. This whole set was like, setting was intimidating and scary. So anyway, we walked up to my grandfather, and he didn't get up. He just sat in that chair, absolutely straight. And my father went and touched his feet, and this is for the first time we had seen our father touch anybody's feet. He had never done this before. We were never brought up to do that. And we noticed that he didn't look at him, he didn't speak to him, he just touched his feet and stood there. And then my grandfather said something to his friend, saying, okay, when did you leave? When did you come? But not to my father, to the friend.
And you all were standing on
We were just standing there. We were just standing there watching this whole thing. There's nothing. Then he turned to us, us, but not asking us, what is her name? What is his name? Which class are they studying in? So he was answering all the questions. And if he didn't know the answer, he would ask us, but then repeat it again, It's a very funny kind of dialogue. Then he said, come, let's have lunch. He took us into this huge dining room, long table, and he sat at the head of the table, then his friend, then my father, then me, and then Cookie, all on one side. And he was at the head of the table. And he served us lunch, and it was almost silent lunch, except for the friends talking to each other a little bit.
Grandfather had a chair in the center, and we were all sitting in the sides, like some court it was. And in Telugu, he just blasted my father for like an hour or more than an hour. And my father never picked up, he kept his head down the whole time. And then we went and gave this fruit and all that. Then we went to a dining room, which was actually a plain dining room. And we had this hot food, which I needed water, and he doesn't allow water while you're having your meal. You can only have it afterwards. But it was too hot for me, so I just asked for it. And he was very sweet, he was very charming to me. And then we moved to a very posh dining room with mosaic and all glass and all that, where we could have our fruit. And to me and Nandana, it was very charming and very sweet. But he was very upset with my father for some reason. And I never saw my father say anything on his behalf. He just kept his head down and went to it,
Actually, he was not such a bad man. He was quite a progressive man. He went to jail under Gandhiji's this thing. And they gave up eating meat. They were voracious meat eaters. My father and mother both. He gave up eating meat. From that time, he never again touched meat in his life. And then he allowed my mother to sell khaddar, going house to house and all that. All that he was going. Then he was also educated his daughters, which was not very common at that time. Even boys were not being studying. Many people used to say, "Why should you study? You go to look after the cows or the fields." Most of the Reddy families, you know. But he was he followed Gandhiji's things, I think. So he allowed them to study. And he also employed what we call the untouchable caste as in the house, and also looked after them and their family and other things. So he was good in many ways, and also some not very good in some ways. That's my impression of him. Mother was not very. She was extremely popular with all our relations. They all used to come and tell their personal stories to her. She was a good listener probably and a good advisor, I don't know. So everybody would come to her and tell her stories. So school I finished, and college also, my school had college also, VR college it is called. But my middle school principal came to my father and said, no, please send him to Madras. The school won't be very good. Somehow he persuaded my father to send me to Madras. And Madras at that time, Presidency College. To get a seat in Presidency College it required a lot of influence and all. We went and met Kumar Reddy, and somehow he gave us a seat in Presidency College. This brother-in-law Gopal Reddy, he was the first student in Shanthaniketan. He took part in the boycotting of British schools. So he gave up studying in the government school, and then there was a national school in Masulpeta. It was against the British system, the national school. And when you passed out of national school, you could only think of going to Shantiniketan. That was the only thing outside the British.
In the family, it was the norm that my two sisters and Pattabhi, they went to Shantiniketan.
My family was very much connected with Gandhi's. My father went to jail in the first movement itself, and later on my closest, my mother's brother, whom I also married my sister, he was a well-known congressman, Gopal Reddy, who was in the Raja's first cabinet. He was the youngest minister, 26 he was at that time. And later on he became Kamaraj Nada's and Omandur Ramsam Reddy's cabinet in Madras. And then when the Andhra became this thing, he was a minister in that Prakasham's cabinet. After that he became Chief Minister of Andhra. The Andhra capital was in Kurnool. And he shifted to Hyderabad, and Sanjeev Reddy became the Chief Minister, and he took on the Finance Ministry. After that he was taken to Delhi, Nehru's cabinet. I wanted to study in London, so I got a seat in King's College. So I was to go on September 3rd. Year I am not able to tell exact, but September 1st the war broke out between England and Germany. So the ship also got cancelled, and my trip also got cancelled. So I just stayed back. And after 1 year, after some, then I thought of going to America on this mica business.
He did his BA in Calcutta. He got his degree in Calcutta University. Then he went to Columbia University for his master's. And at that time, we couldn't send money to students. It was the year 1939. And so when my father was sending mica to America, they put him as agent to sell, and he would get 1% or something if he, I mean, he was not the agent, but somebody else would sell. But he'll get 1% of the, hardly any dollars for him to have a decent life in New York. He took 3 months to reach India by, taking ships like that, and my father couldn't send him money or ticket or anything. Then he came.
Yeah, I went to Madras, and then my father was not interested in film business. He said, our own business, why don't you look after, But somehow film business, at least I was a bit interested, because it has something to do with language, poetry, music, dance, and all things that I liked. So my friend at that time and I joined together, and we had one famous film director was a good friend of ours, since I was his roommate in Victoria Hostel earlier. He was one K.V. Reddy. He is the foundation stone for Vahini Studios and for Nagireddy's prosperity and all that. So he said, yes, I'll do some film. Why don't you come here? You should come. I'll do one film for Nagireddy, one film for you. On that assurance, we started this Jayanti Film Combine.
After he returned from America, I have come to know him well. He was one among the good friends that we had, and he got married to Joyce Powell. And she changed her name to Snehalata Reddy.
And Snehalata was doing some jewelry designing in Gemini Studios, I heard. There was Gemini Studios in Madras, which Vasan owned it. And she was doing some designing of jewelry for the stars. She was not a star at that time. She had a job. Most beautiful woman I have met, Snehalata, at that time. I know she must have been 16 or 18. But she was my junior in college also, Queen Mary's. She used to dance for the anniversary, college anniversaries and all that. And at that time he met her, I think. He was staying in Theosophical Society, Pattabhi, in the Leadbeater's chambers on the beach. He had a room there. He used to stay, and met her and wanted to marry her.
And that Pattabhi was a Hindu. My mother wasn't very keen on the marriage. However, Sneha had made up her mind, and so had Pattabhi. And after a while they left for Madras. And before they left for Madras, they told me that we are going to get married. Don't tell anybody. It's a secret.
Well, it was January 5th, I think. She came very happy. I was staying in her house only. But we both came out, went to Venkatachalam's house. He was a bachelor. He was died as a bachelor also. He's the one who did the Salar Jung's museum, who catalogued it and all that. We went to his place, 6 St. John's Road, which is there even now. And I had bought, I went with Venkatachalam to previous day to Vijayalakshmi Hall in Chickpet and bought the usual wedding sari, that wedding border and all that. At that time it cost 300 rupees only, in those days. And then she changed there, and we both went to, because we couldn't get a registered marriage, we thought we had to give notice and all that. This was a secret marriage, it was not possible. So we opted for Arya Samaj marriage. So we went to Baswangudi, someplace, there was Arya Samaj building, and there they made this marriage. So it took about half an hour or 1 hour or something. They were the only home, they don't believe in Thali, and though Thali, I did try Thali, but they say only after the marriage you can try it. The marriage is only, according to Vedic rite, is only Homa, Agni Sakshi, that's all it is. And then they sang some Vedic chants, and we got married. And that night, I invited them all to West End. They didn't know that they're coming to a wedding. You know, Sneha's father, mother, and some cousins, and Mantachalam. About 10, 12 of us. We had dinner in West End at that time. That's how I got married.
But Avi's father, of course, didn't accept the marriage. And sisters slowly, I think, came around. I was very pleasant to them. Later on, they came back to Madras and settled on a beach house in Adyar, which was fenced and which had a well behind it. And you could walk right into the lair, into the sea, right from there. And they seemed to be very happy there, because I spent quite a lot of time with them.
My father, for the sake of income tax purposes, he had divided the property between me, my son, my brother, 3 of us, but we were not in control of it. It was being managed by my father only. So I had to seek the help of my sisters' families. So they were sending me some money per month, so that I could, I took a place in Adyar, you know. By that time, we had, for some 30 of us bought a 40-acre plot just behind Kalakshetra. 40 behind Kalakshetra, and there was an old tiled house in it. So I was staying in it for 1 year. First, as soon as I married, we stayed there. So 40 acres, Casuarina top, all cut off. Casuarina also. In the beginning when we were there, so my jeep could go through the Casuarina also.
They spent very happy days there. And finally they decided to move and go to, I think it was Shinoy Nagar. And they bought a house there. And then they were preparing, this was 1952, they were preparing for the birth of Nandana. But prior to this, they had been to Europe in 1951, and I accompanied them. And we toured the whole of England and visited the exhibition which was there in 1951, the exhibition of Britain. And from there, they bought a caravan and went on to Europe. And they finally came to Sevilla in Spain, and they found a place to live and a servant to cook and clean. And they also found, they found a very good teacher of Spanish dancing, flamenco, named Master Rialito. And this gentleman was pretty old. He had taught a lot of famous people like Carmen Amaya, who was very famous in her day, and he had taught also Rita Hayworth while she was doing a film. And one of these times, Sneha danced for the Duke of Alba, and that was quite a trip. Quite a show.
If I had to describe it, it was a very magical kind of childhood. It was full of music. We would listen to flamenco music all the time. There would be theatre, there would be politics, you know, people like Ram Manohar Lohia would be coming to our house, Madhu Limaye would come to our house, they would stay, there would be discussions, you know, very heated discussions, very heated debates about India and what India should be and how we should build a new world, a new India. So we were brought up in a very it was almost like you're creating a new world, and we as kids found this all very exciting, very magical, very challenging, because we were all in a way expected to meet that challenge. We couldn't just be ordinary children, you know, we had to be somebody who could contribute to this dream.
I can remember one time, but that's because it's a shock, because once my mother was calling me in and I was on the wall and not coming in, and she got so frustrated and she said, do some things. So he called me in angrily, and he didn't hit me, but he just tapped my back, you know, and I got so upset because he never did anything like this in his till then, you know. So it was more just the shock of his losing his temper. But I remember it more as because it was some out of the ordinary experience. But later on, when I was like 13 and all, then I can remember funny incidents. Like once we went to Bombay by a Herald with 4 ball tires, and we had 19 punctures on the way. And when we reached actually Pune and the Ghats, the brakes failed, and he was peaceful throughout, you know. The brakes failed and the car was hurtling down, and there were 2 beggars, children running, begging for money, and I was asking him, should I jump out of the car and go down these hairpin bends, you know, and then put a stone and all that. But he was so cool, and eventually there was the road lifted up again. So he went up there and stopped. And then we went to Bombay, and we stayed there 3 months, and he never repaired the brakes.
Mummy was the person who made the home, you know, in the sense who made it comfortable, you know, the food, the making people, you know, stay, welcoming friends, the creative, you know, the overtly creative, always wanting to look at new things and new ideas. Acting was a passion. Music was a passion. She started Madras Players because theatre was something for her. Theatre was in her blood. It was almost as though she was acting. She would, you know, at the drop of her hat, she could act. I think even as a child, she was passionately fond of acting, because there are a lot of photographs of her as a child in school, in plays, doing Joan of Arc. And also, it was very funny because the plays that she did were all those kinds of crusade, struggle, fight, battle, you know, this thing of triumph of good over evil. Those kinds of themes were her, I think, you know, part of her almost. And there was very little difference between that and her real life. Because real life also she would do that. If there was somebody being beaten on the road by a policeman, she'd stop the car and fight. You know, she was like that. If the little sabji wala who came to the house to sell sabji told her a sob story, then that would become her struggle for that week. She would take that up and do something about it. You know, if she found somebody shivering on the sidewalk, she'll take off her shawl, and it was something. It was a part of her being, a part in her blood, I think. And even her acting was almost trying to enact this, you know. It was like trying to make fiction into reality, reality into fiction, no? And there was a very thin line between the two. So even at home, I mean, she would be rehearsing, for instance, Twelfth Night or Peer Gynt or one of these plays, and the next minute she'd be cooking, you know. And for us, there was very little, we couldn't see the difference between the two. She was always that, you know. And of course, because they had traveled so much, and I think that way my mother complimented my father, because she had this huge worldview, you know. and she was brought up in a very different cultural context. She understood other cultures much better than my father perhaps would have done.
She is a remarkable person. That's one thing I can say.
She was very emotional but very real. She could move, she could change things with that. She had a definite power. I remember when in Mahabalipuram once, some cousins of ours, much older than us, that had gone swimming. Only one guy knew how to swim. Two of his friends couldn't swim. So they had gone and the wave had taken them away. They were drowning. And then the fisherman said, no, I can't go. My mother went up to him. They're going to die. If I go, I'll get drowned. But her pleading and her immediateness was so strong that she just looked at him and said, you have to go. He jumped into the water and saved them. And luckily that he went and caught them, and there was another catamaran coming and they picked them up. So she has that quality.
Sneha was so charismatic, no? She was really like a, how would you put it? She's like a force, you know. She was like a force of nature. She wasn't in every aspect, isn't it? It's just not her. Of course, her immense energy to do things, her and the fact that she did all those things so well. You know? I mean, I remember whether it was you know, caring for people, the kind of cooking, the kind of meals, the kind of. I used to always be so taken aback by how she remembered the little things, you know, that each person liked or didn't like, or and then of course her just the example that she held out. I mean, you know, I was what, 24, maybe 25 when I met her, and you know, as a young woman, when I looked at her, it's almost like this is somebody, you know, that it's a kind of a possibility of a life, you know, in front of you, the possibility of how you could live your life or how you could be, you know, and so that was, she made a huge impression, I mean, a real huge impression in the days before I knew about the, you know, even the days before we had articulated things like feminism, or we had, and later I did become part of the women's movement, and where in a sense it was a more structured or a more theoretical way to look at society. But even before that, even before all that became more conscious, before I rationally came to these ideas, I think I intuitively recognized something in her, or she, it was exciting to see that somebody could live this way.
Sneha, of course, was the epitome of all that Madras Press was and is. So we all used to flock around her. But I think a lot of her energy and so on got its counterpoint from Pattabhi, who was like you know, when you have a candle and there's something protects it from the wind. Pattabhi was like that. He was all calm. He was all calm and she was all energy. So though she was the one in one's consciousness, Pattabhi was there behind all of us, balancing the whole thing.
She had a mind of her own. She was passionate. And when she changed completely.
She's written a lot. She's written Sita. Then, and she's written a lot, not just Sita. That's one play that she's written, but we are still finding articles that she's written, you know, about women and about equality and about poverty and about theatre and about various plays and critique of, you know, various playwrights, and she's written a lot of poetry. She used to sing very well. She's put all my father's poems to song. Unfortunately, we don't have it on tape, but you know, all my father's Telugu poems, she had put it to music.
We went to the place in Spain where Pattabhi and Sneha stayed for over a year or so. I believe Sneha was learning dancing. We went to the same street and to the same building, and nothing much has changed there, because it was like almost the same kind of surroundings, and I believe Nandana was conceived there in that time. So she has a Spanish name with her, Bilia. I believe the name is, the meaning is born out of love. And it was very, very nice experience, all of us being there in the same street, and then of course he used to tell us that they used to sit and have wine, and while Snehalata was learning dancing, she used to sit and sip wine, and then the wonderful times they had. Unfortunately, I didn't meet Nandana's mother. By the time I came to know the family, she was no more. So, and again, I have a great loss as a friend, not only as a father, but as a friend. Is no more with us, and now there's a big void in our life.
Probably the lasting memory I have is him sitting in St. Mark's Road in that wooden chair, and as he sits there, people come of all shades, all opinions. They come, they sit, they do whatever they want, and they go, and he sort of just absorbs and gives his love, and he hardly hurts anybody. He takes all the hurt himself. So that is and the vastness of his heart. That's what whenever we meet him, we feel vast. Not only in his heart, but also his thoughts, very unusual. And of course, much later I heard, came to know about his interest in mathematics. So after that, really, I started getting re-interested in my own physics. So even today now I am looking at some of the nice things of physics.
ಏನು ಮಾಡೋದು ಹಾಗಾದ್ರೆ? ಅಗ್ರಹಾರದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೆಣ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ಕೂಡೋದು ಸಾಧ್ಯವಿಲ್ಲ. ಹೆಣ ಹೋಗೋವರೆಗೆ ಪೂಜೆ, ಸಂಧ್ಯಾ ವಂದನೆ, ಊಟ ಏನೂ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಬಹಿಷ್ಕಾರ ಹಾಕ್ಲಿಲ್ಲ, ಆದ್ದರಿಂದ ಹೆಣ ಇತರೆ ಜನಕ್ಕೆ ಬಿಟ್ಕೊಡೋ ಹಾಗೆ.
ಬಹಿಷ್ಕಾರ ಹಾಕ್ತೆ ಬಂದಿದ್ದೆ ಸಂದಿಗ್ಧ. ಅದು ಹೇಗೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ತಗೊಂಡ? ಸೂತ್ರೆ ಹೊರಲಿ ಹೆಣ. ಬೇರೆಯವರು ಶವ ಸಂಸ್ಕಾರ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಬಂಗಾರನೂ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಸೇರಬೇಕು. ಅದನ್ನ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೀರಾ?
ಯಾರ ಆಸ್ತಿ ಅಂತ ಅವಳು ಹಂಚ್ತಾಳಂತೆ. ಎಲ್ಲ ಸರಿಯಾಗಿದ್ದಿದ್ರೆ ನನ್ನ ತಂಗಿ ಕೊಳ್ಳಲಿರ್ಬೇಕಾಗಿತ್ತು.
ಗಂಡಸರ ಕಾಪಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಂದೆ ತರ ಹರತೆ. ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಇರು. ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಮಾತಾಯ್ತು. ಹಂಗಾರ ಧರ್ಮಸ್ಥಳದ ನ್ಯಾಯದ ಪ್ರಕಾರ ನನಗೆ ಸೇರ್ಬೇಕು. ಸಂದೇಹ ಇದ್ರೆ ಕೋರ್ಟ್ನಲ್ಲೇ ತೀರ್ಮಾನ ಮಾಡಿ.
ನೀವು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ತಾಳ್ಮೆಯಿಂದಿರಿ. ನಮ್ಮ ಮುಂದಿರೋದು ಸಂಸ್ಕಾರವಾಗಬೇಕಾದ ಶಿವ. ಬಂಗಾರದ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ನನಗೆ ಬಿಟ್ಬಿಡಿ. ನಾನು ಧರ್ಮಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ ಎಲ್ಲ ಹುಡುಕಿ ನೋಡ್ತೇನೆ. ಈ ಸಂದಿಗ್ಧಕ್ಕೆ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಉತ್ತರ ಇರಲೇಬೇಕು. ನೀವೆಲ್ಲ ಹೊರಡಿ, ನಾನು ನೋಡಿ.
I will tell you how it happened. I had a very dear, very close friend called Gopal Gowda, Shantaveri Gopal Gowda. I think one of the greatest politicians that this country has produced. He was the one who fought against landlordism, fought for Kannada language, fought for more democratic open spaces. He was a very remarkable man. He came from a Gowda community in Malnad, which was a feudal community. The rich were feudal, but he came from a poorer background, and he was a great socialist. And he was not only a political man, but he was a very literary man. I would relate everything that I wrote to Gopal. Actually, dedicated my novel, Samskara, to 3 people, one of whom was Gopal Gowda. And he was excited by the novel. He had seen it even as in its manuscript stage. And a manuscript was sent to Madras, and Dr. Lohia heard this story. And Lohia was very close to the Pattabhi family. That again, that Lohia came close to both Sneha and Pattabhi, coming from the kind of background that they came from. And they responded to Dr. Lohia, and Dr. Lohia told them the story and said to Pattabhi, why don't you make a film? That's why it was Ram Manohar Films.
We had invited Dr. Lohia and Madhuli Bae and Gopal Gowda. Gopal Gowda is a famous socialist of Karnataka. And it so happened at the time Gopal Gowda was telling this story, and I happened to overhear. He was telling this to Dr. Lohia, saying that one of our socialist member, not actual party member, but socialist writer, Dr. Ananthamurthy, has written a novel called Samskara, which has become a big controversial novel in Karnataka. There's a lot of agitation against it and all that. So he told the story briefly, which I heard. Then immediately I said that may make a good film. And I was thinking of making a film, and also it in Kannada.
Gopal Gowda, who was the socialist leader, who was a friend of Ananthamurthy, talked to Pattabhi about it. I was there at the dinner, which was dinner or tea given in honor of Gopal Gowda, where I think Gopal Gowda said to Pattabhi, why don't you make a film based on Samskara? And then Pattabhi said to me, here's this novel, why don't we make a film? And I said, marvelous, of course very excited.
So it took some time for the script to get ready. And then I and Sneha persuaded Girish that he should act the role of Praneshwari. Girish felt that he was, the role as he conceived from the book was much older. I said, it doesn't matter, you can make him a little less old, and so finally he agreed.
I didn't want to act in it. Sneha was the lead role. I didn't want to act in it, but then we couldn't afford stars. We couldn't afford outside actors. So I said to Pattabhi, I'll be your assistant director because I'm more interested in being a director rather than an actor. But he said, no, you do it. We knew each other as actors through Madras Players, and so it was decided that we would do the play. But of course, in those days, there was no translation of the novel. It was only in Kannada, published in Kannada. So I read out the novel twice, right through. I mean, I took the Kannada and then read it page by page in Pattabhi's house to the Madras Players crowd. And then someone had to write it down in English. So Pattabhi said, why don't you write it down? And I said, shall I try to write it as a script? And he said, yes, go ahead, do it. So I wrote a script which probably was not satisfactory. I was not a filmmaker. I had just read books on filmmaking, like the technique of film editing, which we all read, in Carol Rice. So on the basis of that, I wrote what must have been a pretty stodgy script, but following Samskara, which was the basis on which ultimately the screenplay was worked out.
All of us came together to make this low-budget film. And I remember how Pattabhi, supervised the script and had a vision of the whole film in his mind.
We'll look at the locations, we'll see some of the actors, and then we sat down at the table in Madras and we made the film in Madras on paper. We constructed a montage of about 950 shots. That was the way he wanted to work, and I was also I was thrilled with that idea. So it was complex. It had all the rhythm built into it, the shot for shot. Every shot was planned, and And then we realised that, okay, it's a 30-day shoot. We're doing virtually 30 shots a day to get the 1,000 shots. This was not known to the actors, unfortunately. I didn't realise that they knew so little about making films.
And that was fine. I mean, you know, we were all wildly excited, and all the women's roles were largely done by Madras, members of Madras players. Lakshmi Krishnamurthy was there, Vishalam was there, Yamuna was there, Sneha was there, you know, like that, because there was in those days a resistance to acting in films in Bangalore from women. As for men, of course, we were introduced to all kinds of actors by Y&K, who knew everybody but everybody in Bangalore. I mean, Dashrati Dikshit, you know, mentioned them. I mean, he took us to meet these people, amateur actors who came and were very enthusiastic. And then Shivanand, Gubbi Shivanand, the son of Gubbi Virana, he took us to his company, and where we met the older actors. You know, we wanted those older Brahmins, and some of them were actually actors from Shiva Gubbi company. Actually, they didn't turn out to be very good in the end, because we found that those who had experience on stage were not necessarily relaxed in front of the camera, but it didn't matter, we didn't know. And so the casting was done and so on.
Then whom to get to shoot the film? Just a coincidence that, as I told you, I was living in Cholamandal Artist Village. Two Australian boys, Tom Cowan and Stephen Carthew, they both came to Cholamandal, and they both wanted to meet Satyajit Ray on their way to Hollywood. They had heard about Cholamandal Artist Village, so they came there, and people used to come like that, live there, you know. And so Tom Cowan, so I was full of this story, Samskara at that time, the whole thing, you know, how to. Then Tom Cowan, you know, was there, and so I told Tom, look, you know, the story is like this. I told him the entire story, to both of them. Tom Cowan said, what an exciting story, Vasudev, you know. I said, can you handle the camera? I'd be delighted to do. I said, look, I do not know what filmmaker you are. You only say that you are a documentary filmmaker. I have no idea, I have not seen. I will introduce you to Girish Karnad and to Pattabhi Reddy. Then we will see your films, if you can get. So I took him, introduced him and Stephen Carthew to both Girish and Pattabhi. We got his film from Australian Embassy, from Australia. We saw the film at British Council in Madras, and all of us felt that he could handle it.
So it was going to be a marvelous adventure in which we were going to participate. I think the first note of worry that came into it, yes, the first note of worry came into it when Pattabhi brought in Singitam Srinivas Rao as the assistant director. It worried us because Pattabhi didn't know Kannada. He couldn't read the novel, he didn't know the language. Tom Cowan didn't know Kannada, he didn't. Now Singitam was brought in as an assistant director, and he didn't know Kannada either. I mean, you know, he was a Telugu man and so on. He was technically perfect, but he didn't know Kannada, and this is worrisome. Actually, in retrospect, I think Pattabhi did a good thing. He did the right thing, because Singitam has now developed into a major filmmaker, and he was an asset. He knew, and he put up with all the tensions, and he learnt a lot, and Samskara also transformed him. He was one of those people who could learn and develop. And got on with us, and in retrospect, I think his coming actually helped the film, but at that time we were worried.
So we had some hiccups, you know. First 2 days of shooting took 4 days, and it was always a tension for Pattabhi, because money, how much money, you know, to spend and things like that, and so we used to have sort of tensions on that score. Anyway, whatever it is, we wanted to make the film, and that was done.
Anyway, the point came to when the shooting started. The question was, no one could direct the actors, you see, because Pattabhi and others were not capable of Kannada. They couldn't look at the Kannada text, so someone had to do it. And Pattabhi said to me, will you do that? I said yes. What I said to him is that I won't interfere in the shooting, but in the evenings I'll sit with these Brahmins and conduct reading sessions. And he said okay, and then for 2 or 3 days, I think, we went through the scene, which is about 20 minutes long, of the Brahmins collecting and whatever saying, and the various dialogues we rehearsed. And then shooting began. When shooting began, I tried to keep off the shooting, but inevitably, since Pattabhi was not present, or Singitam was not present when I was telling them, what I had told them and what was they were being told on at the time of the shooting began to conflict. And they were frazzled, and some of them said that we are getting worried, you know, something different is being said. So there were 2 or 3 times when I had to go, when the shooting was on, and say, now look, this is what we have said, do this, you know, which is probably not what Singitam or Pattabhi had told them with the shooting.
The only people who had experience were myself, Pattabhi, who'd produced some films, and Srinivasan Rao, and the production manager. Basically, that's it. I mean, the crew, but they didn't know what the hell was going on, because it was not like any other film that they'd ever worked on. But everyone, of course, was totally committed to making the film in the utmost artistic way. And they were totally personally involved too, because the story was something that related to their lives, particularly the Brahmin.
I think today I wouldn't do that, because, you know, I would realize that you don't just go to an actor and say, do this or do that. But I thought I had Pattabhi's permission to do that, because he had asked me to rehearse them. But anyway, there must have been tensions, and then probably Singitam said I should be asked to step back and so on. And then something very unfortunate happened, which left a very long shadow on Samskara, which is that Pattabhi, instead of calling me aside quietly, me and Vasudev, me aside, and saying, no, look, don't interfere, it's creating a problem, which was okay, because, you know, we were dear friends, and Vasudev and I and he had discussed this, called a meeting. And one evening, in a meeting that consisted of Singitam Srinivasa Rao, Tom Kavan, Gopi, the production manager, Pattabhi, the women were out, then me, you know, 7 or 8 of us sat there. Pattabhi said, please don't interfere. Okay, everyone had drinks, and Pattabhi had more than most, I think, at that time. He was fairly drunk, I remember. And he said, now, you know, this is disrupting, I know this may be causing, please stay there. Which annoyed me a great deal, because I said to him, no, look, we have done everything together between us. You could have told me, why are you asking me in front of everyone? You know, why are you doing this? And Pattabhi said, no, that was not the intention. I said, no, it is, you know, I take umbrage to it, and Vasudev also felt very upset, because it was a simple thing that could happen. And then at the end of that meeting, which ended with a great deal of bitterness between, I was very bitter, and Vasudev in effect said, let's walk off. Okay, let's get into the car and drive off. But we thought over it, and I said, now look, if we walk off now, it will get around these amateurs tried a film and it didn't work. You know, they collapsed. This is what amateurs will do, and any attempt like this will be doomed forever. So we said, no, we won't do that. We will complete the film to the best of our knowledge, and we did complete the film. We carried on the film. But the unfortunate part then was that the direction unit fell into 2 groups. On one side was Pattabhi, Singitam, Tom Kavan, none of whom knew Kannada. You see, and me and Vasudev and Gopi, who could have done and helped with on many occasions, we just stayed out. Vasudev would just do what he was asked to do and then stayed out, you know. And I was also, we were just what was minimally required of this. And when talking to the press also, I think one was probably vicious. I take, you know, because one was very upset. And one said, you know, these non-Kannada people, what they will do, we don't know. You know, this kind of remarks, I'm sure we made.
And I remember quite a few shots, you know, where Pattabhi was there, I was there. I remember one in particular. Girish, as Pranashacharya, has to eat a banana offered by Putta. And Putta again was a marvelous addition, you know, from Bangalore.
ನಿಲ್ರಿ ನಾನು ಮಾಲೇರ ಪುಟ್ಟ ಚಿಕ್ಕ ಜಾತ್ರೆಗೆ ಹೊರಟವ. ತಾವು ಯಾವ ಕಡೆಯವರು? ನಿಮ್ಮನ್ನು ದೂರದಿಂದ ನೋಡಿ ಯಾರೋ ಪರಿಚಯದವರು ಅಂತ ಅನ್ಕೊಂಡೆ.
ಇಲ್ಲ, ನಾ ಘಟ್ಟದ ಕೆಳಗೆ ನಾನು ಸಂಭಾವನೆಗೆ ಹೊರಟವ.
ಓ ನಮ್ಮ ಮಾವನ ಮನೆನೂ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಅಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲಿ ನೀವು ಕುಂದಾಪುರ ಓ ನಿಮಗೆ ಶೀನಪ್ಪನ ಪರಿಚಯ ಇವೆ ನಮಗೂ ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ಬಹಳ ಬೇಕಾದ ನಮ್ಮ ಮಾವನವ್ರಿಗೂ ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ತುಂಬಾ ಕೇವಲ ನನ್ನ ಹೆಂಡತಿ ತಂಗಿನೇ ಅವ್ರು ಎರಡನೇ ಮಗನಿಗೆ ತಂದ್ಕೊಂಡಿರೋದು ನನಗೆ ಮಾತು ಬೇಕಪ್ಪ ದಾರಿಲಿ ಮಾತಿಗೆ ಸಿಕ್ಕರೆ ದಾರಿ ಕಳೆದಿದ್ದೇ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ ನನಗಂತೂ ಮಾತುಗಳು ಜನ ಬೇಕಪ್ಪ
ನಾನಿಲ್ಲಿ ಕೊಂಚ ಕೂತ್ಕೋತೇನೆ ನೀವು ಮುಂದೆ ಹೋಗಿ
ಓ ನನಗೇನಾತ ಒಂದು ಬೀಡಿ ಸೇರಿದ್ರಾಯ್ತು
I remember when I landed in Sringeri that early morning, the first thing that happened to me was I was taken to a salon and had my hair cut. When I met the other actors, all of them had gone bald. So the joke in Bangalore was, if you see any theatre person going around in Bangalore with a shaven head, well, were you a part of Samskara film? I remember the shooting in Sringeri for Samskara. I remember that remarkable cameraman, the Australian Tom Cowan, and the whole effort was like a family effort.
In any case, it cannot be denied that Samskara would not have happened but for him, but for the money he produced, but for his coming into it, Sneha coming into it, and all that, all that he put into it.
But it was a wonderful time that we had there. I know that every evening we'd go off to have a drink at Koppa, all dressed up in our costumes, and that was fun because first time we went, we had only Brahmin, Pakka Brahmin women, and me, a widow in that. And we went off and we asked for, we couldn't afford too much, so we each got a quarter bottle of rum, I remember. And though that chap was aghast at this lot, Girish went as a priest, and there were all these beautiful Brahmin women, and there was this widow in that maroon dress, and we were all busy drinking our rum. But then, by the end of the evening, he realized that we were in costume.
ಆಚಾರ್ಯ ಅವರೆಲ್ಲ ಹೆದರಿ ಸಾಯ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಯಾರಿಗೆ ಆ ಬಂಗಾರ ಸಿಕ್ಕುತ್ತೋ ಅಂತ ಹೆದರಿ ಸಾಯ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ ತಮಗೆ ಬೇಕಾಗಿರೋ ಬಂಗಾರ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಒಬ್ಬರೊಬ್ಬರ ಸಂಕಟ ತೋಡಿಕೋತಾರೆ ಕಪಟಿಗಳು.
The best incidents which I can still remember is Lankesh acting in the film. We chose Lankesh as the bad man Aranappa in the film. And that was the last day of shooting. Pattabhi said, today you have to finish the film, otherwise I don't have money. We have to pack up from here. And Lankesh comes to the location, that's there. And Lankesh has never acted in the film before. So there is a sequence, Chandri, that is Snehalata Reddy, Girish Karnad and Lankesh. This sequence we have to do. That sequence we have to do. And so Lankesh was very nervous.